Lieutenant Sarah Martinez had always been smaller than everyone else in the room. At 5 feet 4 inches and barely 130 pounds. She stood out like a sparrow among hawks at the Naval Special Warfare Training Facility in Coronado. The other recruits towered over her, their broad shoulders and thick necks making her look like someone's little sister who had wandered into the wrong building. But Sarah had something most of them didn't have. She had grown up with 4 older brothers who thought the best way to show love was through wrestling matches that usually ended with someone getting hurt. Her father, a retired Marine, had taught her that size meant nothing if you knew how to use leverage and speed. Her mother, a former police officer, had shown her that the element of surprise was worth more than 50 pounds of muscle. The whispers started on her first day. The other recruits looked at her like she was a joke, someone who would wash out before the week was over. They had good reason to think so. The Naval Special Warfare Program had a failure rate of over 80%, and most of those who failed were men twice her size with years of military experience. Commander Jack Morrison was a legend in the SEAL community. 6 feet 3 inches of solid muscle, with scars on his arms from 3 tours in Afghanistan, and eyes that could make a grown man confess his secrets. He had trained hundreds of recruits over his 15-year career, and he had never seen a woman make it through his program, not because he was against women in combat, but because the physical demands were simply too extreme. When he first saw Sarah in his class, he felt a mixture of admiration and concern. He admired her courage for even attempting the program, but he was concerned about her safety. The training was designed to break people, to find their limits and push them beyond what they thought possible. He had seen men twice her size carried away on stretchers. The other recruits seemed to think Sarah's presence was some kind of social experiment. They made jokes when they thought she couldn't hear, placing bets on how long she would last. Some gave her 3 days. The optimists said she might make it a week. Sarah heard every word. She had been hearing similar comments her entire life. In high school, coaches had told her she was too small for sports. In college, professors had suggested she might be better suited for desk jobs than field work. When she joined the Navy, her commanding officers had steered her toward administrative roles. But Sarah had always believed that actions spoke louder than words. While the other recruits spent their evenings complaining about the training or bragging about their achievements, she was in the gym. She studied every manual she could get her hands on, memorizing techniques and strategies that might give her an edge. The physical training was brutal. 5-mile runs in soft sand that left legs screaming in pain. Obstacle courses designed by someone with a sadistic imagination. Swimming exercises in rough ocean water that tested both skill and mental toughness. Every day brought new challenges that seemed specifically designed to find weaknesses. Sarah struggled with some exercises, especially those that required pure upper body strength. But she excelled in others. Her small size made her faster through tight spaces. Her low center of gravity gave her better balance. Most importantly, her determination never wavered, even when her body wanted to quit. Commander Morrison watched her carefully. He had expected her to drop out after the first week of Hell Week, but she kept showing up. Her times weren't always the best, but she never quit. She never complained. She never asked for special treatment. She just kept pushing forward, with a quiet determination that reminded him of some of the best soldiers he had ever known. The other recruits began to notice too. It's hard to maintain disrespect for someone who keeps up with you when you're giving everything you have. Some of them started treating her like a real teammate instead of an oddity. Others resented her presence even more, feeling like she was somehow diminishing their achievements by being there. The tension came to a head during the 6th week of training. The class was practicing hand-to-hand combat, learning techniques that might save their lives if they were ever captured or found themselves without weapons. Commander Morrison was demonstrating proper defensive stances when one of the larger recruits, a former college football player named Peterson, made a comment that carried across the training mat. "This is ridiculous," Peterson said to his buddy. "We're wasting time pretending she could actually defend herself against a real enemy." Any terrorist with half a brain would just pick her up and throw her. The comment hung in the air like smoke. Every recruit heard it. Commander Morrison heard it too. The training mat went silent except for the sound of ocean waves in the distance. Sarah felt her face flush with embarrassment and anger. She had been dealing with comments like this for months, but somehow, this one hit harder. Maybe because it came in front of everyone. Maybe because it questioned not just her ability, but her right to be there at all. Commander Morrison looked at Peterson with disappointment. The program was supposed to build teamwork and respect, not tear people down. But before he could address the comment, Sarah stepped forward. "I'd like to demonstrate a defensive technique," she said quietly. Her voice was steady, but there was something in her tone that made everyone pay attention. Commander Morrison hesitated. Demonstrations were usually done between instructors and volunteers, not between recruits. But something in Sarah's eyes told him this was important, not just for her, but for the entire class. "Peterson," Morrison called out. "You'll be the attacker. Sarah will demonstrate defensive positioning." Peterson grinned, thinking this would be easy. He had played defensive line in college and weighed over 200 pounds. He figured he could gently overpower her and prove his point without actually hurting her. But as they squared off on the mat, Sarah's demeanor changed completely. The quiet, determined recruit disappeared, replaced by someone who moved with the fluid confidence of a predator. Her brothers hadn't just wrestled with her growing up. They had taught her to fight like her life depended on it. The other recruits formed a circle around them. Commander Morrison explained the exercise, but everyone was really watching to see what would happen when Peterson tried to grab her. The smart money was still on the big guy, but something about the way Sarah was standing made a few people reconsider their bets. What happened next would be talked about for years afterward. It would become the story that defined Sarah's reputation and changed how everyone in the program thought about physical confrontations. But in that moment, with 100 eyes watching and her future in the program hanging in the balance, Sarah was just focused on one thing: proving that size isn't everything. Peterson approached with the confidence of someone who had never lost a physical confrontation. At 6 feet 2 inches and 215 pounds, he had been the strongest guy in most rooms his entire life. College football had taught him to use his size as a weapon, and military training had only added to his advantages. Sarah watched him come forward, her mind automatically calculating angles and possibilities. Her oldest brother Miguel had been about Peterson's size, and he had never gone easy on her during their backyard fights. Her father had always said that in a real fight, the person who hesitates loses. The person who overthinks gets hurt. Trust your training and let your body react. Commander Morrison stood to the side, ready to intervene if things got out of hand. He had seen thousands of these demonstrations, and they usually followed predictable patterns. The larger person would grab, the smaller person would struggle, and then he would step in to explain proper technique. He expected this to be educational, but brief. The other recruits pressed closer, some still making quiet jokes about the mismatch. But a few of the smarter ones noticed something different about Sarah's stance. She wasn't standing like someone who was about to be overpowered. She was balanced on the balls of her feet. Her hands relaxed, but ready. Her eyes locked on Peterson's chest rather than his face. "Remember," Commander Morrison announced, "Peterson is going to attempt a basic grab and control. Sarah will demonstrate proper defensive response. This isn't about winning or losing. It's about learning technique." But Peterson had his own agenda. He wanted to make his point about women in combat. And he figured the best way to do that was to show everyone how easily he could overpower the class's only female recruit. He decided to grab her hard enough to make it clear that in a real fight, she wouldn't stand a chance. Sarah saw the shift in his expression, the way his jaw tightened with determination. She recognized the look from her brothers when they decided to stop playing around and really try to pin her. That look meant he wasn't going to hold back as much as he should have. Peterson lunged forward, reaching for her shoulders with both hands. It was a move designed to use his size advantage, grabbing her and lifting her off the ground where her speed wouldn't matter. In his mind, the demonstration would be over in seconds. What happened next unfolded so quickly that most witnesses would argue about the details for years afterward. Sarah didn't try to back away or block his grab. Instead, she stepped slightly to her right and forward, moving inside his reach, just as his hands were closing on empty air. Her left hand shot out, fingers extended, and struck him just below his sternum in a precise nerve strike her mother had taught her. The blow hit Peterson like an electric shock, temporarily disrupting the signals between his brain and his diaphragm. For a crucial half-second, he couldn't breathe or coordinate his movements. That half-second was all Sarah needed. She grabbed his right wrist with both hands, using his forward momentum against him. Her right foot swept behind his ankle while she pulled his arm across her body, executing a throw that her second-oldest brother Carlos had used on her 1,000 times. Peterson's weight and his own aggressive movement did most of the work. The big recruit hit the mat hard, his breath exploding out of his lungs in a whoosh that everyone heard. But Sarah wasn't finished. As Peterson tried to push himself up, still stunned from the fall and struggling to catch his breath, Sarah moved with practiced precision. She dropped her knee onto his back, just below his ribcage, putting her full weight behind the blow. At 130 pounds, she wasn't heavy enough to cause serious damage. But the precise placement and timing sent a shock of pain through Peterson's ribs that made him cry out. The sound echoed across the training area like a gunshot. 100 recruits and instructors went completely silent, staring at the impossible scene in front of them. Peterson, the former college football star who had been talking about throwing Sarah around, was face down on the mat with his smaller opponent's knee in his back. Commander Morrison stepped forward quickly, but Sarah was already backing away, her hands raised to show she was done. Peterson rolled over slowly, one hand pressed to his ribs, his face a mixture of pain and complete shock. "Is he hurt?" Morrison asked, dropping to one knee beside Peterson. "Just bruised," Sarah replied calmly. The nerve strike was temporary, and the knee drop was placed to avoid organ damage. Morrison looked at her with new eyes. The technical precision of what she had just done was impressive, but what really caught his attention was her composure. She wasn't celebrating or gloating. She had demonstrated her point and stopped exactly when she needed to stop. Peterson sat up slowly, wincing as he felt his ribs. They weren't broken, but they would be sore for weeks. More painful than the physical damage was the humiliation. In less than 5 seconds, he had gone from confident aggressor to defeated opponent in front of everyone who mattered. "How?" he asked, looking up at Sarah with genuine confusion. "Leverage and timing," she replied simply. "You expected me to try matching your strength. I used your strength against you instead." Leverage. The other recruits were still processing what they had witnessed. The quiet girl, who had been the target of jokes and betting pools, had just taken down the biggest, strongest guy in their class. And she had made it look easy. Commander Morrison stood up, his mind racing. In 15 years of training SEAL candidates, he had never seen a recruit demonstrate that level of technical skill in hand-to-hand combat. Military training taught basic techniques, but what Sarah had just done required years of practice and natural ability. "Where did you learn to fight like that?" he asked. Sarah shrugged, suddenly self-conscious now that the adrenaline was fading. "My family. My brothers thought wrestling was fun. My mother taught me that if someone bigger tries to hurt you, you don't play fair." "Your mother was police?" Morrison asked, remembering her file. 22 years. She said the most dangerous thing any cop could do was assume they were stronger than the person they were arresting. Size doesn't matter if you know what you're doing. Peterson finally managed to stand up, still holding his side. The anger he had felt towards Sarah was gone, replaced by grudging respect and embarrassment. He had underestimated her completely, and his ribs would remind him of that mistake for a long time. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I was wrong about you." Sarah nodded, accepting the apology without making a big deal about it. She had proven what she needed to prove, and holding grudges wasn't part of her personality. But Commander Morrison was still thinking about what he had witnessed. The technical skill was impressive, but what really struck him was the tactical thinking. Sarah hadn't just gotten lucky. She had analyzed Peterson's approach, identified his weaknesses, and executed a plan that turned his advantages against him. That kind of strategic thinking was exactly what made great special forces operators. Physical strength was important, but the ability to assess situations quickly and find unconventional solutions was what separated good soldiers from exceptional ones. Word of the incident spread through the base faster than wildfire. By evening, everyone from the mess hall cooks to the base commander had heard some version of the story about the small female recruit who had dropped Peterson with a knee to the ribs. The stories grew with each telling, as military stories always do. Some versions had Sarah throwing Peterson across the room. Others claimed she had broken multiple ribs. A few creative storytellers added fictional dialogue and dramatic flourishes that made the incident sound like something from an action movie. But the core truth remained the same. Sarah Martinez had faced down someone who thought she didn't belong, and she had proven him wrong in the most direct way possible. The question now was, what would happen next? Because in the world of military training, proving yourself once isn't enough. Every day brings new challenges, new tests, and new opportunities to fail. Sarah had won this battle, but the war for respect and acceptance was far from over. Commander Morrison watched her during the evening meal, noting how the other recruits interacted with her now. Some treated her with new respect, asking about her techniques and background. Others seemed resentful, as if her success somehow diminished their own achievements. But Sarah seemed unaffected by both the praise and the resentment. She ate her meal quietly, reviewed her training materials, and prepared for the next day, just like she always had. The demonstration had been necessary, but it wasn't the reason she was here. She was here to become a SEAL, and that goal was still far from achieved. The next morning brought unexpected consequences that nobody had anticipated. Commander Morrison arrived at the training facility to find his commanding officer, Captain Reynolds, waiting in his office with a stern expression that suggested trouble. "We need to talk about yesterday's incident," Captain Reynolds said without preamble. "I've had 3 calls from Pentagon officials asking about a female recruit who allegedly assaulted a male trainee during hand-to-hand combat training." Morrison felt his stomach drop. Military bureaucracy had a way of turning reasonable training exercises into career-ending scandals, especially when gender politics got involved. Someone had obviously reported the incident up the chain of command, and now it was being examined under a microscope by people who hadn't been there. "Sir, it was a controlled demonstration," Morrison explained carefully. "Recruit Martinez was defending herself against inappropriate comments and proving her capabilities. No rules were broken, and no one was seriously injured." Captain Reynolds held up a hand to stop him. "I'm not questioning your judgment, Commander, but this has attracted attention from very high levels. Some people see this as proof that women can compete in special forces. Others see it as evidence that mixed-gender training creates unnecessary conflicts." The captain walked to the window overlooking the training grounds where recruits were already beginning their morning exercises. Sarah was among them, running with the pack as if nothing unusual had happened the day before. "Tell me honestly," Reynolds continued. "Is she SEAL material?" Morrison had been asking himself the same question since yesterday's demonstration. Sarah's technical skills were impressive, but becoming a SEAL required more than fighting ability. It required leadership, teamwork, mental toughness, and the ability to perform under extreme pressure for extended periods. "She's tough," Morrison said finally. "Tougher than most of the men in her class. Her physical scores aren't the highest, but she compensates with intelligence and determination. Yesterday proved she can handle herself in a confrontation. And the other recruits? How are they reacting?" That was the complicated part. The demonstration had created 2 distinct camps among the trainees. About half had gained new respect for Sarah and were treating her as an equal team member for the first time. The other half resented her even more, feeling like she had somehow cheated or embarrassed them all. Peterson himself had become an unexpected ally. His initial anger at being humiliated had given way to professional respect, and he had been asking Sarah to teach him some of the techniques she had used. But several other recruits seemed to view her success as a personal challenge. Mixed reactions, Morrison admitted. Some are treating her like a teammate now. Others are looking for ways to prove she got lucky. Captain Reynolds nodded thoughtfully. The Pentagon wants a full report on her progress. There's a lot of pressure to either fast-track women into special forces or prove definitively that it can't work. Either way, Recruit Martinez is about to become the most watched trainee in naval special warfare history. That afternoon, Sarah noticed the changes immediately. There were more instructors, observing training exercises. Someone with a camera was documenting certain activities. Most importantly, the difficulty level of everything seemed to have increased overnight. What she didn't know was that Commander Morrison had been ordered to test her limits more aggressively. The Pentagon officials wanted to see how she would perform under maximum stress, and they wanted documentation of every success and failure. The first real test came during water survival training. Recruits were required to swim 2 miles in rough ocean water while carrying full gear, then tread water for 30 minutes, without assistance. It was designed to simulate emergency conditions, where equipment failure might leave someone stranded at sea. Sarah had always been a strong swimmer, but the added weight of gear and the choppy conditions made this exponentially more difficult than pool training. Halfway through the swim, her shoulders began burning with fatigue, and her breathing became labored. Several male recruits were also struggling, but all eyes were on Sarah. If she failed this test, it would be documented and analyzed by people looking for reasons to exclude women from combat roles. If she succeeded, it would add to the growing pressure and expectations. She made it to the 2-mile mark third in her class, ahead of several men who outweighed her by 50 pounds. But the treading water portion was where many recruits failed, and it was where her smaller size became a serious disadvantage. Treading water for 30 minutes requires enormous energy expenditure, and larger body mass actually provides an advantage in terms of buoyancy and heat retention. As the minutes ticked by, Sarah found herself working twice as hard as the men around her just to keep her head above water. At the 20-minute mark, her legs felt like lead weights. At 25 minutes, she was using every technique her brothers had taught her just to stay afloat. At 28 minutes, she began to wonder if she was going to make it. Commander Morrison watched from the boat, fighting the urge to pull her out early. He could see she was in trouble, but he also knew that helping her now would undermine everything she had worked for. This was exactly the kind of moment that separated those who belonged in special forces from those who didn't. Sarah managed to complete the 30 minutes, but just barely. When the instructors finally called time, she was so exhausted she could barely swim to the boat ladder. Her performance had been adequate, but not impressive, and everyone knew it. That evening, while reviewing training footage for his report, Morrison noticed something interesting. During the most difficult portion of the water survival test, when Sarah was clearly struggling, she had never shown panic or desperation. Her technique had remained sound even when her strength was failing. More importantly, 2 other recruits had also been in trouble during the same period, and she had somehow managed to position herself between them and the deeper water, ready to assist if either of them went under. Even while fighting for her own survival, she had been thinking about her teammates. The next major test came during a simulated hostage rescue scenario that required teams to coordinate complex tactical movements while under fire from paintball weapons. Sarah was assigned as second in command of a 4-person team that included Peterson and 2 other recruits who had been openly skeptical of her abilities. The scenario was designed to be nearly impossible. The teams had to approach a building held by instructors with superior weapons and positions, rescue mock hostages, and extract without taking more than 2 casualties. Most teams failed multiple times before finding a successful approach. Sarah's team was struggling with the same problems as everyone else, until she suggested a different strategy. Instead of trying to match the defenders' firepower, she proposed using their expectations against them. "They're expecting us to come through the obvious entry points," she explained during their planning session. "What if we create a distraction at the front, while 2 people go through the back? They'll focus their fire on the noise, giving us time to reach the hostages. Peterson, still remembering his encounter with her tactical thinking, supported the plan immediately. The other two team members were skeptical, but willing to try anything that might work. The strategy succeeded brilliantly. While Peterson and another recruit created noise and movement at the main entrance, Sarah and the fourth team member slipped through a rear window and secured the mock hostages before the defenders could reposition. The entire exercise was completed in record time, with 0 casualties. Word of the successful mission reached the observers, adding another positive note to Sarah's growing file. But it also increased the pressure from those who felt she was receiving special attention or easier treatment. The real test of her acceptance came during the following week's combat exercise, when her team was paired against a group led by Roberts, one of the recruits who had been most vocal about women in combat roles. Roberts had been quietly building resentment since the Peterson incident, feeling like Sarah's success was somehow diminishing his own achievements. He saw the combat exercise as an opportunity to prove that her previous victories had been flukes. The exercise pitted the two teams against each other in a capture-the-flag scenario using paintball weapons and simulated explosives. Victory required not just physical ability, but also leadership, strategy, and teamwork under pressure. Roberts' team had advantages in size and raw firepower, but Sarah's team had been working together longer and had learned to use unconventional tactics. The battle stretched over 4 hours, with both sides trading successes and setbacks. In the final phase, both teams were reduced to 2 members each, and the flag was positioned in an open area that seemed impossible to reach without being eliminated. Roberts chose a direct assault approach, using suppressing fire while his teammates sprinted for the objective. Sarah made a different choice. She sent her remaining teammate on a flanking maneuver, while she created a distraction by deliberately exposing herself to enemy fire. The move was risky, requiring precise timing and perfect trust between teammates. Roberts took the bait, focusing his fire on Sarah's position while her teammates circled behind him. By the time Roberts realized what was happening, Sarah's partner had secured the flag and reached the extraction point. After the exercise, Roberts approached Sarah with a mixture of frustration and respect. "You're not what I expected," he admitted grudgingly. "You don't fight like I thought you would." "I don't fight like you do," Sarah replied. "That doesn't make either of us wrong." Commander Morrison watched the interaction with satisfaction. The conversation represented a breakthrough that went beyond individual achievement. Sarah wasn't just proving she could compete with men, she was proving that different approaches could be equally effective. But the real test was still to come. Success in training exercises was one thing. The final evaluation would determine whether she could earn the respect and trust necessary to lead Special Forces operations where lives depended on split-second decisions and absolute confidence in every team member. 3 weeks later, Sarah stood with the 12 remaining members of her original class, waiting for the final evaluation results. Of the 48 recruits who had started the program, only 13 had made it this far. The failure rate had been typical, but the attention focused on the program had been anything but ordinary. Captain Reynolds delivered the results personally, reading each name with the formality that such moments deserved. When he called Sarah's name among those who had successfully completed the program, the reaction was notably different from the usual celebration. There was applause, but it was tempered by the knowledge that Sarah's achievement represented more than individual success. She had become the first woman to complete naval special warfare training, and everyone present understood the historical significance of the moment. Commander Morrison felt a complex mixture of pride and concern as he watched Sarah receive her qualification. She had earned her place through ability and determination, but he knew that her real challenges were just beginning. Being the first woman, SEAL meant that every mission would be scrutinized, every decision questioned, and every mistake magnified. She would need to be not just as good as her male counterparts, but better, just to be considered equal. But as Morrison watched Sarah stand at attention with her new teammates, he felt confident that she was ready for whatever came next. She had proven that determination and intelligence could overcome physical disadvantages, that unconventional thinking could be as valuable as traditional strength. Most importantly, She had earned something that couldn't be taught or faked: the respect of warriors who had tested her under the most demanding conditions possible, and found her worthy of standing beside them. The program that had started with whispers and betting pools about how quickly she would fail had ended with Sarah Martinez proving that the only limitations that truly mattered were the ones people imposed on themselves. 6 months later, when Sarah led her first operational mission, none of her teammates questioned her qualifications or worried about her ability to keep up. They had all heard the story of how she had dropped Peterson with a knee to the ribs. But more importantly, they had worked alongside her long enough to know that she would never let them down. The legend of that first demonstration would follow her throughout her career, growing and changing with each telling. But Sarah herself rarely mentioned it, preferring to let her ongoing performance speak for itself. She had learned long ago that respect wasn't something you earned once and kept forever. It was something you had to prove again every single day, with every decision and every action. The fight with Peterson had been just the beginning of a much longer battle to change how people thought about women in combat. But it had been an important beginning, because it had shown everyone watching that sometimes the most dangerous opponents are the ones you underestimate.